Hello, darlings, and welcome to Cinema Spotlight with Jake and Reuben. I'm Jake.
I'm Reuben, and this is your regular roundup of all of the latest films and re-releases hitting screens this week.
In this episode, we'll be talking about the new horror music epic that is Ryan Coogler's Sinners, starring Michael B. Jordan and Haley Steinfeld, and a cast of fabulous players.
Next up, we have Warfare, the new film by Ex Machina director Alex Garland, who teams up with Iraq veteran Ray Mendoza to tell a story based on his own wartime experiences.
Then, Reuben will be talking about a film starring Steve Coogan and a penguin. It's The Penguin Lessons.
And to top everything off, we're returning to the classic film Wallace and Gromit and the Curse of the Were-Rabbit.
Hello everyone, it is I, Jake, from Cinema Spotlight with Jake and Reuben. This is a call out to all aspiring filmmakers out there. Remember to email us at cinemaspotlightjakeandreuben.com with all your cool and quirky and amazing little films. We'd love to see them, we'd love to chat to you, so send them our way and we'll bring you in for an interview.
And of course, do make sure that you are following us over on YouTube and Spotify. We've got over 100 subscribers now, so that probably means we'll have 50,000 next week. We'd love it if you liked, subscribed, commented, told us everything that we've got wrong. We're really looking forward to hearing from you.
The first film we're talking about is Ryan Coogler's new Stephen King-esque film Sinners, starring Michael B. Jordan, not just as one role, but as two. He plays two somewhat criminal twins who are starting a new dance hall, as they have just returned from Chicago to the Mississippi Delta. However, as they try to establish themselves as credible businessmen, strange things occur. Demons in the night crawl out with their very sharp teeth. Spoilers, there are vampires in this movie. Now, this film is not only just a cinematic masterpiece. It looks beautiful, the acting is incredible, the action and horror are incredible, but it also has one of the greatest soundtracks of modern times. It utilizes music in a way that I haven't seen in a very long time and does it in a very effective way. It is a great demonstration of cultural music, of blues music, of what then becomes rock and roll. Everything sort of generates. It has a brilliant, brilliant soundtrack. And so it also deals with horror really, really nicely. It's a far better vampire film than some we've previously talked about on this program. But I'm going to pass it off to my capable co-host and ask him, Reuben, what did you think of Sinners?
Well, I'm concerned that I've been downgraded from esteemed to merely capable, but I really like this film. However, I think that over the course of this review, what will become apparent is that I think that there is so much in this film that I also haven't managed to appreciate, and I think it might be even better than I already think it is. So I went into this knowing only really that at some point vampires were going to turn up. I had studiously avoided watching any trailers, and I'd done quite a good job of, sort of staying away from reviews. So I have to say, I was really surprised by the story of this, because actually what it's about is it's about the magical, transportive power of music. The film has this kind of pre-title sequence which basically sets out the lore of the land, which is that basically within every kind of culture, every society, there are these genius musicians, and through their work, they have the ability to essentially transgress the laws of time and space, and they can summon spirits from the past, present, and future. And therefore, these people, whilst their music is extraordinary, it is also in itself a form of magic. And we then are introduced to our central protagonist, Sammy, who is a fantastically talented blues musician, but he's confronted by his preacher father, who tells him that he needs to abandon his music and give up his guitar because it's dangerous and he is cavorting with sinners. And little does he know just how right he is, because the film then takes us back 24 hours earlier to, as Jake mentioned in the introduction, these mob brothers who've just come in from Chicago, Smoke and Stack, both played phenomenally by Michael B. Jordan, who are setting up a juke joint, and they want Sammy, their younger cousin, to play at that night's grand opening. I just thought that this was crazy, honestly. It takes such a swerve about a third of the way through into suddenly being a campy horror film. And I have to say that delighted me, because I did find the first sort of 40 minutes, while they're very, very good, it's quite a straight, quite restrained in many ways, kind of period drama. And the moment that we get the introduction of the vampire characters, led, I think, by an amazing Jack O'Connell, that's when it all shifts into gear. There is literally, they pan up to the moon, Ludwig Göransson plays a fun little campy guitar riff, the synthesizers kick in, and you're just like, okay, oh sorry, it's Thriller. Suddenly, it's Thriller. It's just great. It's really, really good fun. And from then, I was just completely swept up in it. As you said, Jake, I just thought the soundtrack, both the live performances that we're seeing and Ludwig Göransson's score, it's produced by his wife as well. It's really, really something special. This is definitely going to win Best Original Score next year, right? It has to.
Oh, it absolutely has to. It has an electric quality to it. There's a brilliant sequence, and what really solidified the movie for me, which some I could see might find a bit goofy.
I know exactly what you're going to say. For me, this is the moment that I sort of sat back and went, oh, this Ryan Coogler really knows what he's doing.
He knows what he's doing, because it is quite straight to begin with, but I quite like it. It's very well done, the beginning. All the parts are very, very well played. Everyone feels very weathered, and they exist in this world. No one puts a foot wrong in how they present their characters. I think it's very, very neat acting, very, very neat direction. Everyone just seems basking in this Mississippi sun. It just looks great. Everything looks great. The costumes are great. There's a sequence where Sammy, Preacher Boy Sammy, starts playing properly, and it just encapsulates the whole audience. And then it has a very surreal moment where lots of characters come in from different time periods, and then different aspects of music. You know, electric guitar comes in, DJ decks, hip hop, people dancing not only in more traditional African styles, but all the way up to modern dance that is popularized by African Americans. It was spectacular. Some people might say, oh, that's a bit odd, but to me, I think this is real talented filmmaking, because you're pushing the boundaries. It doesn't have to be so bland in its representation where, oh, we can interpret that this will lead to it. Why not show it? It's a visual art, and they show it so, so nicely. What else about this film that really gets me is that it reminds me a lot of my favorite book, which is Salem's Lot, which I think there must be some inspiration for the vampire characters, because there's this idea of community, of this sort of spanning plague that sort of unites everyone under this sort of hypnotic, trance-like presentation as vampires. Jack O'Connell plays the Kurt Barlow-esque character, someone with a very sweet voice, and is able to lure people in. It's the best way I've seen vampirism presented in literature, but this is a really nice way of demonstrating it in person. The way they sort of entrap people through the beauty of their own song. It's not only a meditation on cultural music, but it's also a meditation on racism and the effects of white supremacy, and the idea of appropriation and all this stuff as part of one community, the idea of religious extremism as well. And it just layers it all so nicely in this quite palatable package, because Ruben's right, it does become kind of like a very fun B-movie horror, but with stakes, because they've done such a good job in developing all the characters and all the relationships. You know exactly what people want and who they are, especially Michael B. Jordan, who has the task of juggling two very distinct twin brothers who have their own desires and own wants, and yet are so easily identifiable.
Can we take a moment also to appreciate how much better Michael B. Jordan is at playing two different characters in the same scene than Robert De Niro in Alto Nights, where you never really believe, A, that there's any reason he should be playing both of them, or that they've ever set foot in the same room. I thought the interplay between them is very, very good. He has fantastic chemistry with himself.
Yes, it's quite marvellous. Some may say that might be a fault of massive Hollywood ego, but who knows? It works very well for this film. There seems to be a lot of trust between director and actor here, which is really nice. Of course, they've worked together extensively, and it really shows. It really does show. It really works. It's very, very neatly done. I just really think that it does capture a bit of what some recent vampire movies, Nosferatu, have been missing, which is the fear and the allure of a vampire. Nosferatu is quite obviously repulsive and repugnant in his presentation, but at no point did I ever feel like I would be entranced by this mystical being. Jack O'Connell is always presented as quite foul, and he's always covered in blood, and is able to entice and attract far more conventionally beautiful people. But, you know, he's always presented as quite ugly of soul, and, you know, his first victims are Ku Klux Klan members, so we're not supposed to love them. But it's a much better way at showing the power of the vampire. It's sort of what I've been missing in sort of recent horror cinema with their presentation of vampires, because it's not overly unique. As I said, it reminds me a lot of Salem's Lot, but if you're going to adapt something, why not adapt the best way of presenting it? And it just really works. And I mean, the songs they sing, because they come together, these three vampires come to the door of the Juke joint and they sing these songs, and there's a moment where Haley Steinfeld goes out to see them, and they're just so beautifully well mixed, beautifully arranged music that, you know, you can really understand that it's quite an interesting take, that you've got the beauty of the cultural blues music of the main characters, but then you're not shying away from other beautiful music of this different culture.
Oh, but it's so creepy as well, right? Like that sequence where they first come to the door and like as one, like all of their emotions are completely matching. Like they are a hive mind, and you can see that just from the second that they pluck out their instruments.
I liked the fact that they made them so as equally as good almost, but in a way that feels more sanitized than the raw music that is presented by Preacher Boy Sammy, our de facto main character, sort of the way we're seeing the world. And so, yeah, I think this is my favorite film of the year so far. I'd be as bold to say that, because it was just such a ride. And a bit like what I was saying about Drop last week, how it sort of changes into a different type of film. Ruben's right, it does sort of take different turns, and I love every turn it takes. Every time you feel like it's becoming a bit too safe, it always tries something else. And sometimes even when you think, oh, it's all over now, still not. You know, there's a little bit of tension brewing, or an extra bit of flourish to put in there just to enrich the entire experience. I always find it hard to talk about films I absolutely love, because all I want to say is I absolutely freaking loved it. I would go watch it again, because as Ruben says, there's so much, it's so packed, but it never feels overstuffed. It just feels like you're having a great 5-course meal that you want to cherish all the little bits, but you are just, no, I have to be in the now and experience it all as just one thing right now, and then go back and try and think, oh, that was nice when I ate that, and that was nice, and, you know, and see if you can go back and have it again. So yeah, it's incredible. It absolutely is incredible. I couldn't put a fault wrong. I couldn't really fault it.
Well, it's interesting because the place where I think it goes boldly and elevates itself, and I hate to bash on Nosferatu, but I think that was a film which was incredibly, incredibly safe. I think that it did absolutely nothing new. It was the vampire story that we had heard and read and watched many, many, many times over. Done again. Done very well, but just done again. And for me, Sinners is very bold, because it goes, okay, but actually we're going to use vampires to talk about race. We're going to use vampires to talk about segregation in the Deep South. And we're going to use that as an angle from which to go, okay, so the whole thing about vampires is that they stand on the threshold of a room and they can't come in unless invited in. And the film brilliantly taps into that as a visual metaphor for the fact that at this point in America, there are explicit white-only spaces. There are literally entrances that African-American characters in this film can't walk through because it is not divined to be their place. And I think that instantly it suddenly feels like the film is engaging with real-world issues and real-world stakes in a way that just enriches it and adds so many layers to the story. It becomes almost a kind of parable. And therefore, in many ways, they're not evil, I don't think, in this film. Because actually what the vampires want is to build a new, better world free of discrimination, free of segregation. They want to be free. The whole film is about freedom, but it comes at it through this supernatural lens. And I think that's inspired. I think that's a terrific way of taking vampires, which we have seen so many times, and casting them in, if you'll pardon the pun, an entirely new light. So I was really impressed by that. And I just think that's one of the areas that I will understand even better when I watch this a second time around, is I will be so interested in its racial politics and the way that it mines that metaphor.
Yeah, I think Reuben has a really good point there, that it does deal with that idea that the vampires do have this quite alluring sense to them, you know. But the stakes are high, because can you really build a better community without soul? And that's the idea of this film. It's got great soul, not only in soul music, in its representation of some people's strong religious beliefs. It not only deals with Christianity, but also far more traditional African magic that comes to play in the film as well. And I think it's really neat. It's just really bold. And you're right, but soul is such a great thing. It's such a great definition of this film. And Reuben's comments really unlocked it for me, that, yes, that's all it's about. Is it worth your soul to give up? No, you have to stand for what you believe in.
I have one criticism, which is that I think that they roll the credits too early, because this film has a very, very extended post-credits sequence, to the extent that it should just be before the credits. And the reason I say that is because in the screening that I went to, some people left the moment that Ryan Coogler's name came up, and they missed a lot of story. Like, there's a solid 7 minutes of more story after Ryan Coogler's credit appears. So if you go and watch this, make sure that you stay all the way until the end. And indeed, there is a post-credits sting as well. It's not a Marvel film, but this is a film with a lot of story to tell. And frankly, it would be a sin to miss any of it. And that brings us on to the next film on our roster, which is Warfare, the new film by Maestro Alex Garland, co-directing with Iraq War veteran Ray Mendoza. Now, this was famously Garland's sort of side project while he was making Civil War. Ray Mendoza was a kind of consultant for that film, and they have now joined forces to bring this story, which is based on Mendoza's own experiences. He and the other men in his Navy SEAL troop have come together, and they've created, as accurately as possible, their experience on film. And it's a really fascinating beast to get into, I think. But I'll just read out the cast list because it's frankly staggering, and then I'll let Jake tell you all about this film. So this film features Joseph Quinn, Charles Melton, D'Pharaoh Woon-a-tai, Will Poulter, Cosmo Jarvis, Kit Connor, Noah Centineo, and, of course, in a brilliant and perhaps unexpected for Cinema Spotlight surprise, it stars Cinema Spotlight host Inbal Amram in a completely crucial and pivotal and brilliant role. I was blown away by her performance. So, Jake, tell me all about Warfare. Did you like this film? It's been very divisive. And where do you think it sits within the often very polarising filmography of Alex Garland?
Well, this film is very interesting because it is a very brutal and realistic approach. I am aware of how eager they were to recreate it as accurately as possible. And in that, I do actually think it has some credit. The American soldiers presented in the film are not presented overly positively. They're presented with very matter-of-fact, this is what happens, this is what we did, this is what's going on, these people are injured. You know, you get to know a little glimmer of their personalities altogether. And it has a really good opening scene where it's just the whole brigade are just together and they're dancing to music video and just sort of bonding as a team. I think it's really effective. It also utilizes the first great tick for this movie, which is sound design. Sinners also has amazing sound design. I should have said it in the previous review, but this film really does use its sound design really, really neatly. When you need it, the bass is whacked up to the max and everything is just sort of all-encompassing. When there are explosions, you feel them. It actually made me jump. A lot of this film, I don't get jump scares in horror movies, but in this war film, when there are moments which you don't expect, I jumped out of my seat. Is this film good? That's a question. I do think it's good. It's incredibly well made. It's incredibly well made. Everyone is delivering really neat performances, again, that just feel very authentic. It has this sort of scale of authenticity that I think people really hope for. They have a little clip at the end where they show some of the training from some of the consultants that they had, and they just see that the actors are moving in a very similar way to the actual soldiers. And, you know, there's a lot of this movie where people just sat around waiting for something to happen, and the tension really does build, and then as soon as that goes, it's like you're in a firefight. It does really feel like you're minute to minute. I think a lot of this film is trying to represent as close to the time of what happened to the event. It's a short film, it's about an hour and a half, but it sort of feels very compact, that it has a perfect weighting in a way. Is this film enjoyable? That's a different question. I think you are on the edge of your seat. It reminds me of Dunkirk during the dogfight sequences, where you actually are on the edge of your seat waiting for something dramatic, or you're really trying to vie for the people that are perceived, I guess, the good guys. In this film, there's a lot of deliberation between what is good and what is not. As I said, it's very just matter of fact. This is what's happening, and you're seeing what's happening. You, therefore, can piece together by the end your own opinion and your own sort of understanding of how you place this, either politically in your own head or who you're actually rooting for, which is quite hard because, of course, we're coming from a Western point of view. Our country was in this war. It is interesting. I think Reuben pointed out Inbal has a very crucial role. Friend of the show, Inbal. Navy SEALs take over a house. They take over a house that belongs to Iraqi citizens, and they just take it over and camp themselves there, and then a firefight ensues by the enemy that come and try and kill them. It's as basic as that. They're trying to root them out, and it's about trying to get people out, and there's severe casualties, and there's severe damage and severe firefight. And so it's really all-encompassing like that. It as I said, it just does feel very much like you're watching a scene from a training video or genuine scenes from the news. It has that raw quality to it. It's very well directed, very well filmed by the dual directors there. Now, it does have this idea, because Iraq now is looked upon very poorly in retrospect, and how it's a very unjust war, especially from the American point of view, that the reasons that Iraq was invaded were false. That is not me being a political woke boy, that is accurate information. And so it does actually lean into that side, that the American troops are never presented with sweeping music to try and make you emotionally resonate with them. You resonate with them as a human being. You have general empathy when someone gets hurt, that you feel a desire for them to get better. But also you see that the American troops are not as caring towards the Iraqi military that are assisting them, or even the civilians. They are just very much concerned on their own things, often putting at risk the lives of the natives, which, sort of leans towards that sort of discourse that is present in the Iraq conversation. And, it's hard to talk about this film without getting too politically entwined in it. That's the problem with films like this. It's not as clear-cut as something like Saving Private Ryan, I think, where it is obvious who you're rooting for. But yeah, so Reuben, I want to know your opinion, because I think I'll get myself into a woke web if I'm not careful.
Well, this is what I find frustrating about the film. So first off, I completely agree with everything you said. It is stupendously well made. I personally absolutely love Alex Garland as a filmmaker. I even like Men.
I like Men. I also like Men. I'm putting that out there. I think that there's a few major issues, but I do like it.
I really think he's phenomenal, and I think Civil War was absolutely in my top 10 for last year. And I think, though I know there was a lot of discussion about Civil War, I think that is an extremely explicit political message to America and to the world. I do not think it minces its words in the way that I have certainly seen a lot of people claim. And so it is a surprise to me that I did feel that warfare was somewhat unsure of itself. To me, it reminded me of a film which we actually didn't review, but we watched for this show, which was September the 5th, which came out a few months ago, and which was talked about as potentially being an Oscar contender. It covers the same events as the Spielberg film Munich, in that it talks about the hostage situation at the Munich Olympics. And that is a film which absolutely deliberately and consciously takes the approach of being about in the moment. It's not about the politics, it's about the people, and it's about the adrenaline. And it works really, really well as a film about live television, and I don't think it works very well at all as a film about actually a very, very sensitive and in the present day very relevant political situation. And to me, Warfare sort of felt like it fell down the same gap between two stools, where it's trying not to be political, but it is intrinsically political. Jake, you were struggling to not get yourself caught up in all of the politics in your kind of explanation of the film there. But I think that's because it is impossible to talk about this film without talking about the politics. They are, in my opinion, intrinsically linked. You get it in the way that the film is at times, I think, profoundly anti-war, profoundly critical of the way that the US military and indeed, the British government, we are not exempt from this, handled that situation. And there is absolutely explicit racism in the way that the Iraqi advisors who are part of their troop are treated, and in the way that they ruin this family's home. They completely ruin it. And at the end of the film, there is a brilliant scene where our friend of the show rushes up to one of the American soldiers and just shouts, why? And for me, that is where the film is interesting. That is where it comes alive, because you are looking at it through more of a critical lens. You're looking at it in a way that is actually engaging with the full world view. And you are acknowledging the humanity of this family. And that I just found so frustrating, because the rest of the film isn't very interested in that. And it's completely within the right of Ray Mendoza to say, these are my memories and this is how it felt in the moment. I'm not interested in delving into the wider situation. But I think you're cutting off a huge chunk of story, and it just stopped me from being able to fully get into this world, get into this film. Yes, in the moment, it is exhilarating and overwhelming and terrifying and horrible, and it gives you a brilliant snapshot of how awful war is. But we have seen that time and time and time again. War is hell. It's a cliche. And I feel that this film ultimately doesn't have anything to say other than war is hell, by the way, guys. Look, here's a really, really realistic look at it. But we've seen that before. We've seen it in many, many films. I don't think that this is actually particularly more boots on the ground than something like Black Hawk Down.
Do you not feel that perhaps this is relatively intentional? That, okay, Ray Mendoza is presenting his memory, and as I said, very carte blanche, very as fact, but therefore Alex Garland puts in these extra moments that it does feel that a filmmaker would put in. The lingering shots on the absolutely brutalized corpse of an Iraqi serviceman, and also the final bits of the sort of reaction from the family. But that seemed to me like that was a filmmaker's decision to do that, because then it would lead you and I and other people to have conversations like this, where we actually discuss how much of the story is anti-war, how much it actually leans towards the Americans as villains because of the moments that actually leave you when you're leaving the cinema. I know they did tack on a bit about photographs of the the American servicemen, and then a little bit of the behind the scenes, which I actually would have preferred if it was completely after the credits, or even, as much as I know it's respectful, as much as it is removed from the film entirely, because it does actually leave a completely different note. It doesn't feel overly creative, it feels respectful, which I can understand. However, the final couple of shots of the film really does leave you with that sense of confusion, which is a way that the Iraq War is perceived. So it has this great sense of confusion as a topic, and therefore the confusion that is felt throughout the film, I think actually bodes to a much greater conversation like the one we're having. I actually think it was perhaps intentional that, we spend so much time with these Americans and yet we don't ever at any point feel genuine broken this very heartfelt, agonizing, emotive moment, except when friend of the show, Inbal, delivers a great tiny little piece of acting that, is just so subtly used by the filmmakers, but is so impactful and important. And so that's what I think. And I think, is that good? Should it go further? I understand that you think yes, Reuben, but also, is it more nuanced? I don't know.
Well, actually, you make a great point that it is interested in starting conversations, and I think that's true. I think that, to me, I found it frustrating that the film in many ways feels like it's being stretched in two different directions. And you've done a great job of talking about this film, because actually now I think that perhaps that is the result of the fact that it's got two directors. And I think perhaps you're right that some of the notes in there that to me are interesting and I want more of are perhaps from the storyteller Alex Garland, and the visceral, incredibly upsetting reality of war being stressed more by Ray Mendoza because it is his experience. I think that, to me, it loses something by being stripped of a lot of that context and a lot of that character context. It ends up being, in many ways, nothing new, which is a shame, given how exceptionally well made it is. But at the end of it, I felt a little bit like, I'd been on some kind of really amazing roller coaster. It had absolutely rattled me around and thrown me crazy experiences that I'd had. But at the end, I just came back to the beginning and I hadn't really gone anywhere.
Do you hear the call of duty to go see this film, or is it just a Cold War? You decide. Next, Reuben will be talking about Peter Cattaneo's new film, The Penguin Lesson, starring Steve Coogan and a penguin. The story follows an English teacher who moves to Argentina during the military dictatorship, who aims to keep his head down, but is tested when he befriends a penguin and must keep him quiet and secret. So sadly I wasn't able to see this film, but I do love penguins. I love crested penguins. That's a reference from about 10 years ago. Yes, and I'd love to hear Reuben talk about it in all its glory, even though I'm getting positive vibes coming from across the screens here, Reuben. So tell us, what did you think about this film?
Yeah, so I really liked The Penguin Lessons. I think it's a perfect little film, honestly. I think it's really, really, really special because it's simultaneously something that you can go and watch with your grandparents and have a nice little cup of tea and a biscuit at your local picture house. But then it's also a brilliant, brilliant look at what it means to be a person who exists in a society which has problems, which is going wrong, because this is actually an incredibly political film. It's set during the Argentinian military junta, the military dictatorship, and a little bit like the brilliant Brazilian film that we reviewed at the start of the year, I'm Still Here. This is a film about disappearances, because in the 1970s, the military coup which occurred resulted in all of the political opponents of the military junta being taken in either the dead of night or broad daylight and never seen again. It's based on a memoir by the real Tom Michel, and I thought it was brilliant in the way that it blends those kind of two aspects, because it simultaneously is a lovely film, sort of Dead Poet Society style, about this grieving teacher. He's a bit uptight, he doesn't really enjoy his life, he doesn't enjoy his work, he's not interested, he just doesn't care. And it's about a man who goes to teach in a school, and through the experience of working there and meeting a penguin, everything changes and he rediscovers his soul, he rediscovers who he is and his identity in a way that I thought was really, really beautiful. The fact that it can be a story about a man who finds a penguin that's been caught in an oil slick and has been washed up on the beach, and only saves it because he wants to impress the woman he's hoping to take back to his hotel room. The fact that it is able to then balance this story about a literal penguin out of water at a school with this teacher and it be a bit of a comedy, while also talking about this unbelievably horrendous and tragic sequence of events where many, many tens of thousands of people were abducted and tortured and murdered by the military dictatorship. I think the fact that it balances those things is so impressive. And this film is so funny. I laughed out loud. I was one of 3 people in the screening all the way through. There is a hilarious sequence where Steve Coogan has got this penguin. He doesn't want it. He's had to take it back to Argentina. He's smuggled it through customs. He doesn't know what to do with it, so he's trying to give it to the local zoo. But the local zoo don't want it. And so his strategy is he just keeps phoning them up and mafia style threatening to assassinate the penguin if they don't take it. And it's so funny because he's just there phoning them up saying, "Yes, hello, it's me, the Penguin Man. If you don't take him on Monday, he's dead. Phone down." It's brilliant. It's so funny. And Steve Coogan is such a brilliantly talented performer because he's able to nail the comedy. He's so funny, but he's also able to completely make you feel, oh, this is a broken man. This is a hurting man. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. It made me feel happy and elated and in love with these characters. The penguin, Juan Salvador the penguin. I love him. I love him. I want a penguin, although they smell very bad. It's a lovely story. It's like Dead Poets Society meets Turner and Hooch. And that's a great combination because both of those films are brilliant. I just think it's phenomenally great. And through the course of the film, the penguin essentially serves as a way for him to process his grief and also process his position as someone living in Argentina, even though he's not from the country, and what his role is, therefore, in the country's political stakes. And it really spoke to me because of that, because there is a brilliant line where one of the cleaning staff, who is a 19-year-old woman, she says that she's fine with terrible people, doing bad things, but what she hates is when good people do nothing. And I think that we are all aware of the fact that there are issues in society that we oppose and that we are vehemently against. And yet it's scary to speak out. It's scary to do something about that. And so it's interesting for that then to be put on screen in the context of this absolutely, appalling series of abductions and murders, and to see the way in which everybody, because they have to look out for themselves, is silenced. So I thought it had so much to say. It's a story about power. It's a story about the silencing of a nation. But it's also about a man falling in love with a penguin, discovering what it means to be a teacher and to change lives and to educate the next generation and the importance of that. It's all of these things, and it manages to do it all while being sweet, funny, lovely. It's so good. I had a little cry. Honestly, I loved it. It's a great film. I don't have a pun. Finn.
Well, that's great to hear that you're so emphatic about it, my friend. However, I have seen a bit of the discourse that it is a little muted, the response to this film. Is it from animal rights people talking about, well, you shouldn't really have a penguin as a pet? Or is there something about the film that doesn't quite resonate with audiences? Can you see the faults behind your quite positive reaction to it yourself?
Yes, so I think that there absolutely is an argument to be made that it's a bit twee and at times a little bit sentimental. But I like those films, and I think that if you're someone who likes Turner and Hooch or Dead Poets Society, therefore you will also like this film. Because at its heart, it's a story that I think everybody can relate to, because it's about being a person and overcoming the obstacles that you have in your life. Be that grief and depression and loneliness, a job that you hate, struggling to find your political voice, or just the connection that you can have with an animal that changes your life. And I think that a cynic might say, well, it's all just a bit hollow and it's trying to balance this big political message with a nice story about a penguin. But I think the way that it does that is really nicely achieved. I think it's really wonderfully done. I think that the light and shade is balanced wonderfully. And I think that so much of that comes from Steve Coogan, who I think he's one of Britain's best actors. I think he's extraordinary. He's always, always brilliant. And the fact that he can play, characters that we love and characters that we hate and real world monsters, he's just so talented. And this film, I think, allows him to play with all of those aspects, because at times you don't like him and at times he does bad things. There is a phenomenal scene in this film in which one of his newfound friends is abducted. She becomes one of Los Desaparecidos and he stands there and he does nothing, and you watch it and you think, well, I would probably do that too. And that's incredibly powerful. I think that's incredibly powerful. It speaks to the human experience, I think, in a way that is not to be underestimated. And it does it all while making you go, oh, penguins are cute. They're so cute. So I loved it. And honestly, Juan Salvador the penguin, I just love him. I love him. And it finishes with some lovely Super 8 as well of the real Juan Salvador, which is just such a lovely little treat. So honestly, I would really recommend that you go and catch the penguin lessons, Jake. You've got to ignore the haters because it's incredibly lovely. Well, fans of the show will know that last week Jake had a real identity crisis based on the fact that Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit is now 20 years old, a film that he saw at the cinema when it was released. I, of course, didn't see it at the cinema when it was released because I am very, very young. No, sorry, actually, it's just because I didn't go to the cinema until I was 8 years old. Fun fact. Remember it for trivia quiz. Now, Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. What is there to say about this film? An incredible, incredible Oscar-winning stop-motion animation from the geniuses over at Aardman that tells the story of Wallace and Gromit being thrust into a very, very sinister situation when, on the eve of a giant vegetable growing competition, all the produce starts getting chomped. Jake, tell me all your thoughts, feelings and opinions on Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit.
Now, Wallace and Gromit, to me, is one of the finest creations in history. I think it is actually artistic brilliance. It is so intrinsic. Like Doctor Who, it is Britain. It's the best of Britain. It feels so British, and not only British, but it feels northern. And as a northern Englishman myself, it always had a great resonance. To me, it's awfully comforting. Whenever I feel down, I stick on the wrong trousers, I stick on a Grand Day Out or a close shave, and I'm just happy instantly. It just feels, it's like buttery sourdough toast. It just makes me feel so comfortable. And the characters are just so etched into my soul, my DNA. And this film I watched a lot as a kid. And it still has so much as an adult. It is hilarious. Every line is either the line after it's a pun, or that line's a pun, or it's just layered so well. It is so funny. It's a development of the world because, Close Shave came out, late 90s, 95, maybe a bit later. But, it'd been a while since we'd seen Wallace and Gromit. But, Chicken Run had come out and been a great success. And then this film just develops the world even more. You have hilarious characters. The voice cast delivering great efforts. Peter Kay has the funniest line in cinematic history that has actually been censored from the BBC iPlayer version. They censor Peter Kay saying the greatest comedic line. The first night of the Were-Rabbit has occurred, and a poor vicar, a mad vicar, always great tropes in these horror movies, has detailed the curse of the Were-Rabbit. And then Peter Kay says, well, you know what I think? It's arson. Arson? Arson? Yeah, what are you arsing around? Brilliant, brilliant delivery, excellent work. There's just so many, the jokes, they're just the madness of all these people being obsessed with a giant vegetable growing competition. It's only the mind of Nick Park, Steve Box, the Aardman creators could think of. I love all the stuff they do. It's absolutely incredible. They understand that Northern English humour and just the way that things are said are just the funniest things possible. I really think that it just lean into it. And I'm so glad that Vengeance Most Foul came out last year at Christmas and was an absolute roaring success and didn't shy away from this joke a minute, absolutely bonkers piece of work. This film is stellar, and even as an adult I watched it and I actually laughed out loud just at the insanity of it all.
Me too. No, what I think we forget if we don't watch Wallace and Gromit often enough is that actually they're completely universal. I talked about the Penguin Lessons being something that you can watch really from 12 and up all the way to 2000 if you're Doctor Who. But I just thought that the brilliant thing about Wallace and Gromit is this is so accessible to children, but it is also hilarious to adults. It is the most phenomenally cine-literate thing you have ever seen. All the way through, it is references to classic cinema. Oh, a little bit of Chaplin here, a little bit of, Buster Keaton slapstick here. Oh, an Exorcist reference, it's absolutely baked into the DNA of what Wallace and Gromit is, that every single scene will be deeply inspired by some masterpiece of cinema. And often it's quite nice, because it's references to British cinema as well. So it's just brilliant. And what I was struck by how funny this time around watching was there is a brilliant metatextuality to it. And my favourite example of that is when they're in the church and the were-rabbit has first shown itself. And the vicar says, "The were-rabbit!" And the organist plays a dun 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 dun.
Cut that out.
It's just glorious. It's brilliant, it's funny, it's metatextual, it's cine-literate. They're the smartest people in the universe, the folk at Aardman. And it shows because every single frame is so lovingly put together. There is a joke in every single frame, I guarantee it. And you can watch these films 50, 60, 70 times and you'll still find new jokes. They might be dumb jokes, but they're also clever. And that, we've talked about this on the show before, that's my favourite kind of humour.
Well, there's just some great bits, I know that our producer brought it up, but when they get the big mythic book, straight after Wrestling for Nuns, and it's like, oh, no, not that one. They bring out this monster cryptology book, and it's by Claude Savagely. It's brilliant, just every little thing. You and I, Reuben, are big fans of Jerry Anderson, and just the sort of symbology of that. Another incredibly British IP that resonates, just the eye sockets that just beep up, and then they're just launched into just taking rabbits. Also, the tiny rabbits are the cutest things possible. I always remember when the were-rabbit was giving it the big King Kong, and all the little rabbits would do it too. It's just the cutest thing ever. Woo! It's brilliant. I think, as per usual, the characters of Wallace and Gromit fit into their archetypes very well. Wallace is slightly neglectful, clueless, but also the best inventor known to man. It's just he's clueless as well, so he could probably be putting his talents to medical development, but no, has to save the community vegetable competition. And Gromit obviously being the smartest of any character, just understanding things instantly. And it's just so neatly done. And I think Ray Fiennes and Helena Bonham Carter are great additions. They don't take away from it at all. They know exactly what film they're in, and you can just tell that everyone's having fun. It's a real masterpiece that, elevates itself from its clay. And we haven't even talked about how much of a technical feat this was. I think, 10 years in the making? Something mad like that.
It's astonishing. And when you think about the fact they're making a second or something of footage a day, the mind genuinely boggles. I cannot conceive of how you would make a film this perfect that deliberately, if that makes sense. It is a perfect machine, like Wallace's inventions. It is properly, ingeniously constructed in a way that I genuinely cannot fathom.
It is a feat. It is a art, and it went up against in the Oscars some very strong contenders. Corpse Bride, which is another stop motion, but also Howl's Moving Castle, one of the most beautiful films ever made. But this film, I do believe it stands above else because it has everything. It has such layered comedy that's so very British, but, you know, Wallace and Gromit is a universal IP. I remember watching the Aardman DVDs and seeing the trailers in Japanese. You know, it's like it travels across the world because it has that Mr. Bean, Charlie Chaplin quality that you can just enjoy it for its slapstick and its humor. And even if you don't get the nuances of all the very northern humorous jokes, it does resonate because Gromit's the central character in all these films. He's the one who makes all the sense, and he doesn't speak because he's a dog. So it's excellent. You were saying that it has other connections to Britain. It feels very Hammer horror. It feels like it does really lean into that. It doesn't feel like it has universal instances, but because of the way it's presented, the Mad Vicar, it does feel very of the British Isles, you know, and deals with horror in a way that Nosferatu never could. You know, it has moments that would be slightly terrifying for a younger audience, and the central monster reveal is hilarious, but also done in a very dramatic way that is quite awe-inspiring. So once again, another film that is 20 years old and beats Nosferatu. So yeah, no, I mean, go watch this. Go get it on DVD so you don't watch a weirdly censored version by BBC iPlayer. This film is absolutely 24 karat gold. So Reuben, we've had a pretty good week for films this week, which gives us a quite daunting task to end it off by saying what our favourite was. So, do you have one, or is it a rare review where you say, go see everything?
Yeah, well, I think that this is a very unique circumstance where whatever you see this week at the cinema, it will be good. I would say that my film of the week this week is probably Sinners. However, The Penguin Lessons is really good, and Wallace and Gromit is a flat-out masterpiece. So, a triple bill, maybe? What do you think, Jake? Warfare is so good as well.
Well, I'd say that I already said in the review that Sinners is my best of the year so far. I would definitely recommend that because it has something for everyone. It's just so layered in every facet of filmmaking. It really cares about every little bit, and it leaves you with a sense of... It actually has quite a triumphant end as well. It does have a darkness in it, but, you know, it really is all-encompassing. But if horror movies are not your thing, then go see Wallace and Gromit. And I will be catching The Penguin Lessons because I've been convinced by my charming, esteemed co-host.
Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of Cinema Spotlight. It's been absolutely lovely having your company, dear viewer. And Jake, it's been lovely chatting to you as well. What films are we talking about next week?
Well, thank you very much. Those kind words are always lovely to hear from my very capable co-host. Next week, we'll be looking at The Accountant 2, Until Dawn, and the 20th anniversary of Star Wars Episode 3, The Revenge of the Sith. Now, you have to check in, and the only thing I can say about watching next week's episode is you have to do it.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Jeez!